So in problem 6-18, the question is what is the estimated deficiency to unsecured creditors? And as mentioned in the initial discussion class, if you're asked for deficiency, basically you're just asked for your negative equity. And the simplest approach to determine your negative equity is to go back to your basic accounting equation, which tells us that assets is equal to liabilities plus equity. And if we're looking for our negative equity, we just have to look first for our assets, of course, this time at their recoverable amounts or their fair values, and then deduct your liabilities to get your negative equity. And that will already give us our estimated deficiency. Okay, first let's determine the total value of our assets for liquidation purposes, meaning we should be basing it on their fair values or their net realizable value. Of course, for cash, if you notice in the table given in the second page class of the problem, the expected realizable values do not include evaluation for cash because you're already expected to know that the fair value or the recoverable amount of your cash is simply equal to its face value. Again, no one will buy your 1,000 pesos for 1,100, and you will not be willing to give up your 1,000 for 900 pesos. The only sensible price for your 1,000 peso would be 1,000 pesos as well. Okay, so you're expected to know that the cash is already at its fair value. The fair value of cash is always equal to its face value. Next, so you will include 2,860 in your computation of total assets. Next, you'll have accounts receivable. Okay, per books, it's 52,260, but the problem tells us that the realizable value is only 44,100. And between the 52,000 and the 44,000, which one is the relevant valuation here? It's the 44,100. Okay, and do the same for your inventories and your buildings and equipment. Okay, but you also have to check if the listings provided in the problem is exhaustive of all the available assets of the entity. And here you would see that you have a goodwill in the amount of 5,650. Plus, the problem will not tell you the fair value or the recoverable amount from your goodwill. It will not tell you that the recoverable amount will be zero. You're expected to know that goodwill will have a residual value or a recoverable amount of zero. Because again, goodwill will only arise from a business combination. Okay, so you cannot dispose of goodwill separately. You cannot sell goodwill on its own. It will have to be in a business combination. So in a regular disposal class, your goodwill will not have any value. So you're expected to know that goodwill will have a value of zero for liquidation purposes. Okay, and that will already give us all our assets unless the problem tells you of unrecognized assets. That's all you've got to do to determine your total assets. So help me here. Cash 2,860, accounts receivable of 44,100, inventory of 18,500, buildings of 22,000, equipment of 2,000. I forgot about prepaid expenses. You're also expected to know, class, that its recoverable amount will also be zero. Normally, prepaid expenses, class, will not give you anything because normally they are not refundable and they are not transferable. Okay, you will forfeit whatever it is you have prepaid for. Okay, and this is where students would get it wrong. There will be problems that will tell you the fair value of the assets the book value of the assets approximate their fair values. In that case, the book value will just be used as the fair value. But you're expected to know, class, that goodwill and prepaid expenses will have a fair value of zero. So even if the problem tells you that the book value approximates their fair values, you're supposed to assign a value of zero to your goodwill and prepaid expenses. Okay, so help me add these amounts: 2,860, 44,100, 18,500, and 22,000 and 2,000. 89,416,460. And then we already have our total assets. We just need our total liabilities to solve for our negative equity. Uh, we have wages payable, which is 2,500, taxes payable, which is 1,810, accounts payable of 79,000, and the notes payable of 15,150. How much will this four give us, class? 98,000. And compare that with your, how much was it? 85, 89, 460. How much is the difference? And that will already give you your estimated deficiency. Again, the most straightforward approach in solving for your estimated deficiency is to simply solve for your negative equity. And you will just have to go back to your basic accounting equation, which is asset is equal to liabilities plus equity. As an alternative solution, class, you can start with the book value of your shareholders' equity, and then you just reflect the losses and gains from the realization and payment of your liabilities. But I do not prefer that way of computing because for me, it's a lot more complicated because you will have to determine the loss on realization for each type of asset, gain or loss on the settlement of the liabilities. The simpler way would be to simply compute your total assets, compare that with your total liabilities, and that will already give you your negative equity. Okay? And problem 6-18 is a good problem to convert into a shotgun problem, class, wherein you will be asked how much would be paid to fully secured, partially secured, unsecured with priority, and unsecured without priority. And this is more interesting than the earlier problems in this textbook because in the other problems class, the liabilities are already classified as fully secured, partially secured, unsecured with priority, and unsecured without priority. Okay, and here, even though the topic is easy class, for these problems, students would get confused if asked to compute for the amount of payments to the four major classifications of liabilities because the liabilities are not designated as fully or partially secured or unsecured without priority and with priority. You will have to determine yourselves which one is secured, which one is unsecured, which one is with priority, which one is without priority. Let's try to do that in this problem. Wages payable, will this be fully secured, partially secured, unsecured with priority, unsecured without priority? Unsecured with priority. Because again, the three common types of expenditures or payables that are considered with priority by provision of law are your salaries and wages, taxes due to the government, and administrative expenses related to the liquidation. And again, very important, we are not just talking about any administrative expense. We are not talking about administrative expenses related to operations. We're talking about administrative expenses related to the liquidation. Okay, so wages payable would be unsecured with priority. How about taxes payable? Unsecured with priority. How about your accounts payable? Unsecured without, or does the problem tell us whether or not this is secured? No. So your accounts payable would be unsecured without priority. Okay, and then the notes class would be secured, correct? Okay, but is it fully or partially secured? The security is only 10,000. The security is only 10,100. And then the amount of liability is 15,150. So it is secured, but it is only partially secured. So if you will be asking this problem, how much is the payments to unsecured with priority? Our answer would simply be the sum of your 2,500 and 1,810, which is 4,310. Why do we not need the recovery rate to determine the amount to be paid to your unsecured with priority? Because unsecured with priority will receive 100% or full amount of their claims. Next question, how much would be paid to your partially secured and to your unsecured with priority? To answer those two questions, you need to compute for the recovery rate. And for your recovery rate, you will need your net free assets divided by your total unsecured liabilities without priority. Okay, let's start with the net free assets. What are the two things I want you to remember for your net free assets? You begin with your free assets, and then the first thing I want you to remember is do not forget to include the excess on fully secured liabilities. Okay, and the second thing I want you to remember is to deduct the unsecured with priority to arrive at your net free assets. Okay, let's start with our free assets class. Let's determine first which assets here are free. Okay, so again, the reason why this problem would be very tedious to solve class, it's because the assets are not categorized into whether or not they are used as a security or not. The liabilities are not classified as to their classification into secured or unsecured, with priority or without, partially or fully. We will have to do it by ourselves. Okay. Cash here is obviously a free asset. The accounts receivable is also a free asset. Uh, the inventory, is it used as a security? Yes. So the inventory is used. Wait. The notes payable is not just. It's still partially secured. Yes. So the inventory is still. The inventory is a pledged asset. The same for your equipment. So which ones are free class? Is the building a free asset? Yes. So the free assets would be your cash, your accounts receivable, and then buildings. Those three. Give me the sum for those three class, and please take note of that amount. 2860 plus 52,260 plus 50. No, sorry, not 52,260. 2860 plus 44,100 and 22,000. 60, 68,960. Okay. Now, because I have to change what I said earlier, we will have to break down your notes payable class. One one part would be considered as fully secured, another would be considered as partially secured. Our total notes payable is 15,150. 10,100 of which is fully secured. How do we know it's fully secured? It is secured by our inventories, and the value of our inventory is 18,500. Okay, so if our total notes payable is 15,150, and then we have one group amounting to 10,100, the other group will be how much? 5,050. And they are secured by our equipment. But the problem is the value of our equipment is only 2,000. So the 5,050 notes payable will be considered as partially secured. Okay, so let's go back. The first, we begin with our free assets, which was how much? Sorry, how much was it, class? 68,960. And then the first thing I want you to remember for your numerator is to add the excess on your fully secured. We have fully secured here, as mentioned earlier, which was the 10,100. It is secured by an inventory amounting to 18,500. So how much then is the excess? 8,400. Because I'm not taking down the figures. Please provide me the figures later on. So the excess is 8,400. How much is the excess? 10,1 deducted from 18,500. Okay, so we have, yeah, that's correct. So we have inventory of 8,000 that will be considered as a free asset. We'll include that in our free assets. Thank you. Okay, so again, cash of 2,860. but we will have to prorate the uh, so there's a lot to do to convert this problem into a shotgun problem. Should we continue, class? Sige. This problem will come out in our examination. Then you will be asked how much is paid to partially secured, fully secured, unsecured with priority, and unsecured without priority. Expect me to make changes uh, in case the percentage is not good. But can we just at least check if the percentage is good, class, so that I will know if I will have to make revision to some of the figures. Let's prorate the let's prorate the 20,000. 20,000, 20 over 28 times 18,500. 13. I'll have to make changes to this problem. Okay, but expect this problem to come out and you'll be asked those 4 questions. Okay, but the issue raised by your classmate is correct since the problem tells us that only 20,000 was used as a security. The rest of the 8,000 will be treated as a free asset. Okay. So focusing now on the question on problem 6-18, again, very simple. If the question is estimated deficiency, just go back to your basic accounting equation. Deficiency is simply your negative equity, and that is your assets minus liabilities will give you your equity. Let's have 6-19 to 6-20. Okay. Class in 6-18 in 6-19, all you have to do is to determine the assets that are going to be disposed or realized, which will result in assets that will be realized at a loss. Okay, and then for 6-20, assets that will be realized at a gain. So all you have to do will be to compare their book values and their fair values. Accounts receivable is 39,350, and then the recoverable amount is only 16,110. Okay, so the difference there would again be a form of an impairment loss. So that will be part of your answer in 6-19. For notes receivable, the book value is 18,500, and then the recoverable amount is only 12,500. And again, uh, that will form part of your answer in 6. The impairment loss there would form part of your answer in problem 6-19. Next, you have notes receivable of, inventories of 87,850 but can only be sold for 45,100. The difference again will form part of your total loss on realization class or loss on asset disposition. Uh, of course, your prepaid expenses, again, it will be brought down to 0. So you'll have a loss of 950 from your prepaid expenses. And then for your land and building, the appraised value is 95. So this will actually give you a gain class. So this will not be part of your answer in 7-9. This will form part of your answer in 6-20. Okay, and then for your equipment, the book value is 48,800. Uh, how much is the current value? It's 9,000. There's a big loss here from 48,800. It will be brought down to 9,000. And the difference again will form part of your answer in 7-19. Do you have the figures, class? How much is the loss from the accounts receivable? For the notes receivable, 6,000. And then 40, and then the equipment is, how much will that give you all in all? 112,740. And that would be letter D. Can we only have one component for our 6-20, and that would be the difference between 95,000 and 61,250. Okay, and the answer there will be 33,750, which would be your letter B. Uh, let's solve for the expected recovery rate class. Let's start with our free assets. Okay, cash is free. Which ones are not free lang class? Let's try to identify those that are not free. Only the accounts receivable and even the accounts receivable is a free asset. Is the land and building is also not a free asset. They serve as security on the bonds. The equipment is a free asset. So we will have cash of 2,700, accounts receivable of 16,110, uh, inventories of 45,100, and then equipment of 9,000. Give me the total of those four. 2,700, 16,110, 45,100, and 9,000. Okay. Next is the first thing I always want you to remember for your numerator in the recovery rate would be to add the excess on your fully secured. Okay, let's check which ones are secured. The notes to Philippine National Bank, which is 15,000. It is secured by the notes receivable amounting only to 12,500. So the notes payable PNB is secured, but it is only partially secured. Next is the bonds. The bonds is 90,000 and it is secured by the land and building amounting to 95,000. So how do we classify the mortgage bond payable class? Fully secured. And then how much is the excess here? It's 5,000. 95,000 compared with 90,000. Okay? So it was 70, how much was it, class? 72,910. Then add the excess of 5,000. What's the second thing I want you to remember for your numerator? Deduct the unsecured with priority. Which ones here are unsecured with priority? We have two class, accrued wages and accrued taxes amounting to 1,850 and 4,650 for a total of 6,500. So how much then would be your net free assets class? Okay. Next is to divide it by your total unsecured liabilities without any priority. Accounts payable is unsecured, correct? 52,500. The notes payable suppliers is also unsecured. So you will have 51,250. Are those the only two? Yeah, but for your basic unsecured lang. These are the only two. Can you give me the total for these two class? 52,500 and 51,250. This will give you 103,750. Please take note of that amount. Okay? You start with 103,750 and the one thing I want you to remember for your denominator class is to add or include the unsecured portion of your partially secured liabilities. Again, never forget in computing for the recovery rate to add the unsecured portion of your partially secured. Which one is partially secured here? The notes to PNB. It was 15,000 and the security is only 12,500. Okay, so the unsecured portion here is how much? 2,500. Uh, yeah, 15,000 and 12,500. So we were at 107, 103,750 minus 2,500. plus 2,500, that will give you 106,250. So we have the two things we need to solve for our recovery rate, which is your 71,410 divided by, how much will that give you? Without rounding it off, 60 point. That's but since this is a multiple choice problem, we know and it says rounded percentage, we will have 67%. Okay, and with this we can solve for the payments to the four major groups of creditors class. First, unsecured with priority. How much is the payment to the unsecured with priority? 6,500. The sum of your accrued wages and accrued taxes. No need to compute class because again they will get 100% of their claim. Next, fully secured. Which one is fully secured here? The mortgage bond payable, and they will receive how much? 90,000. And that's 2 points already in the examination. Two check marks already. And then third is, let's start with unsecured without priority class. Di ba I asked you to jot down the total of unsecured without priority? It was 100, 103,750. And to get the amount they will recover, you simply multiply them with a recovery rate of 67%. How much will that give you? 69,512.5. Next, last would be your partially secured, which was the notes payable PNB. Okay, out of the 15,000, the 12,500 will be paid in full. The unsecured portion will be paid based on the recovery rate. And the unsecured portion is 2,500 multiplied by the recovery rate of 67%. That will give you 16,667. Sorry. How much? 1,000. 1,675. That's 67% of 25. Two-thirds of 25 is a round number. Two-thirds. 25? How much? Sorry. I'm thinking of two-thirds and we're using 67%. Sorry. So it's 1,675 plus the 12,500. You would get 14,175. Okay. So those would be four possible questions already for this problem. As to the last question, class, basically you will just have to add those four. And that's why I do not agree with the answer. Because if you add those four, class, you would get 180,187.5. And the closest would be letter D. And I do not like that answer, class, because supposedly if you're asked estimated payment to creditors, class, that will just be your total assets, class. If you get the value of your total assets, it would be 180,410, if I remember it correctly. Okay, but because of the rounding of error, class, the total will only be around 180,187. So even if your total available assets is 180,410, di ba we rounded down, class, it was 67.02 or 67.2 something. Okay. Because we rounded down, of course, na ay sobra. So your available assets was 180,410 and all your payments only amount to 180,187.5. Where will the extra go? Will it go to the liquidator? Possible. And that's why I do not like that problem kay supposedly, class, I just want you to understand. If you're asked for total payments, then that is simply your total available assets. The only reason the answer here is not 180, 410, it's because uh, what was done here was to total the payments individually to the four groups. And because of the rounding down of the percentage, the total will only be 180, 188. The question now is, what will we follow, especially if the exam is open-ended? So as much as possible, your exam should not have a rounded off percentage. Otherwise, choices should be given. Okay, but do you get my point, class? If you're asked for total payments, then simply your total assets at their realizable value. Let's have 6-23. So the question here is, how much is your total free assets? Okay, so we are given with our stockholders equity class amounting to 441,000 class. And this means this is still a positive balance class. Okay, and this is before the realization of your assets and recognition of liquidation expenses. But what happened in the interim class, what happened during the liquidation is that uh, you had expenses of 55,125. And what do expenses do to your equity class? Will it increase or decrease your equity? Decrease. So once expenses would be close to your retained earnings, this will cause a reduction to your equity. So the 55,125 will be treated as a deduction to your 441. Okay, and then uh, you had also loss on realization of the assets class. So after you dispose of the assets, you were able to receive cash, but it resulted in a loss of 551,250. And what does a loss do to your retained earnings or to your equity class? It will decrease. So the 551,250 here will be treated as a deduction, further deduction to your equity class. So we started at 441,000. We deduct 55,125, and then we further deduct it with 551,250. Our equity now, this time in negative amount, will be how much? 100, 165,375. And that will be our negative equity. And what did we say about our negative equity class? It will serve as our amount of deficiency. And who shoulders or who will feel the weight of the deficiency class? It will be your unsecured without priority. So if we have a deficiency of how much? 165, 375. How much then will your unsecured liabilities without priority receive? What will you do? You deduct the 165,375 from 1,102,500. And that will be the amount that will be recovered by your unsecured without priority. Do you get the point? Supposedly, how do we compute for the amount to be paid to your unsecured without priority class? Amount of claim multiplied by the recovery rate. Here, we cannot solve for the recovery rate, but we know the amount of deficiency. And we already know that it will be the unsecured without priority that will fully shoulder the deficiency. Okay, so we can figure out that the amount that will be paid to the unsecured without priority will be how much, class? 1102500 minus 165375 will give you how much? 937125. What does that tell us? That is the amount available to them after paying the fully secured, partially secured, and uh, unsecured with priority. Okay, and the only other information provided to us, class, is the amount of unsecured liabilities with priority. And they will be taken from your free assets. Okay, remember, how do we solve for your net free assets? Your free assets minus the unsecured with priority plus the excess on your fully secured. So we have already figured out the amount that is ultimately available to the unsecured without priority. We're trying to work back to our free assets. So basically, the 900, how much was it, class? 937,125 is our net free assets. We have to add back the unsecured liabilities with priority. You add back the 122,500. That is basically your free assets. How much will that give us? 1,059,625. Does everyone understand how we use the 51,125 and the 1102? The 551,250, class? Again, I just want you to understand that they will have an effect of decreasing your equity. And we're reflecting them in our equity to get the total deficiency, which will be shouldered by our unsecured without priority. So basically, this would be one of the more complicated problems, class, but you've already encountered them now. And as a rule, for you to do well, you're only allowed to commit mistakes on problems, on difficult problems you have never encountered before. So even if we are going to consider 6-23 as a difficult problem, you're not allowed to get this wrong because you have already encountered this problem. Your mistakes should only come from difficult problems you have never encountered before. Okay? So for easy questions you have not encountered, class, you are still expected to get them right. You're expected to get all easy questions right. You're expected to get all questions you have previously encountered already. You're expected to get them right as well. Your mistakes should only come from difficult questions you have never encountered. Let's end here with problem 6-23. I'll discuss the rest of the problems with the next class.